Hello.
Hello, please.
Yeah, what's the problem, sir?
We just drove down our farm track.
Yeah.
Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it.
Yeah.
It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And in this video, we take a look at some alternative theories as to how this crime could have been committed. We take a look at the different entry and exit points to the crime scene in question. And did anyone really travel down the original route towards the Range Rover on the evening of December the 6th? Now let's start this video by my first impressions when I started to look into this case maybe some 2 or 3 years ago now. Obviously, my first port of call was looking through the statements concerning this case, watching the documentaries which were made on the Essex Boys murders, and everything seemed to tell the same story. Really, there was just one way into Workhouse Lane and one way out. So the impression I got early on when looking at this case was that there was a single vehicle track which went from the A130, the main road in Rettendon, down that single farm track to where Tucker, Tate and Rolfe lay dead in the Range Rover. So then imagine my surprise after months and months of reading into this case, hours and hours being spent trawling through the statements concerning this case, that when I first arrived in Rettendon back in 2018, I believe it was now, that I realised that it wasn't just a simple case of this single track going down to the Range Rover, but that there were multiple entry and exit points which could have been used by someone who had committed this murder. Now back then I become in a way fascinated by this alternative lane which leads up to where the Wheatsheaf pub car park used to be. Now you should be able to see in front of you a photograph of this lane in question. And this is a lane, as I've said, which leads up to where the Wheatsheaf pub car park was located. Now, for those of you who may be new to this case, maybe you've just stumbled across the Essex Boys case, why the Wheatsheaf pub car park is of particular importance is that this is where both Jack Womes, one of the men who was ultimately convicted of these murders, and also Darren Nichols, the guy who was supposedly the getaway driver that night, this is where both of these individuals state that they were on the evening of December the 6th. So this area, this place which used to be the Wheatsheaf pub car park, has always been a particular place of interest. Now, as I say, once I first visited the crime scene, when I made my first trip there back in 2018, it really started to open up different avenues, in my mind at least, as to how this crime may have been committed. In this video, we're going to go through a few of those. Firstly, we'll start, as I've said, with the alternative lane theory. Then we'll take a look at some of the other entry and exit points which may have been used in order to commit this crime. But let's start, as I say, with the alternative lane. Now, the reason I thought that this one was a better choice in terms of a entry and exit point for committing this triple murder is the fact that it offers protection from both left and right for the whole duration of the lane. Now, remember that this lane runs along the back of White House Farm and goes directly into what was the Wheatsheaf pub car park. The reason I found this alternative lane potentially a better choice than the one detectives believe was used is the fact that when we take a look at that original lane, when we take a look at the one the detectives believe was used, the one that the Range Rover actually travelled down, this one, in my opinion, is fraught with danger. Bearing in mind that this murder was supposedly committed just before 7 p.m. during rush hour on a weekday next to a busy A road, which used to be back then the main road through to Southend. There's most certainly the possibility of someone seeing a car parked up at the start of the lane, and even if you approach from the direction that Darren Nichols claims he did, then you would have had to have stopped traffic more than likely in order to have actually turned down that lane. Now, surely if you were planning this, just put yourself in Michael Steele and Jack Womes' position. You're travelling from the halfway house. The last thing that you're going to want to do at around 7 p.m. or just before 7 p.m. is stop traffic coming the opposite direction in order to turn down a small farm track. Now let's just say for argument's sake that they got incredibly lucky, that they came down the hill and there was nothing coming on the other side of the road which allowed them to turn straight down into Workhouse Lane. Now that would have been a streak of luck, but something that surely must have been factored in to this trip. You know, coming from the halfway house from that direction is going to cause you a lot of problems when trying to access the start of Workhouse Lane. When looking at committing a crime during this time period, surely you must be fearful of potential eyewitnesses. Now, if we go back to Darren Nichols' statement just for one moment, he originally claimed that he dropped Jack Holmes off on the left-hand side of the road. But you can see here, it's basically just a very small grass verge, and there wouldn't be anywhere to stop coming down that sort of blind hill. He wouldn't be able just to pull over on the side of the grass verge and allow Jack Holmes to get out. He later changed his story to say that he actually turned into the lane where Jack Holmes was dropped off. He span his car round, then came back out onto the A130. Now, whatever the truth is in that part of the story, if a vehicle did in fact travel down Workhouse Lane coming from that direction, then it really was a piece of naive planning on behalf of whoever committed this crime. Thinking that you could travel from the halfway house and approach the lane from that side of the road and then cut down there without being seen is incredibly risky. But using that lane, in my opinion, is risky in general. The fact that we're looking at, as I've said, rush hour traffic, even if you approached from the other side of the road, if you were driving on the left-hand side of the road towards the bottom of the hill where the hill starts and you turned left into Workhouse Lane, you're still going to more than likely have to stop traffic. This was a concealed entrance. Now, the fact we don't have anything forensically, the fact we don't have anything from an eyewitness account saying that they saw a vehicle turning into that lane, a Volkswagen Passat or any other type of vehicle travelling down Workhouse Lane, the fact that we have nothing forensically or scientifically or whatever to back up Darren Nichols' version of events tells me that there are other possibilities here. It's worth looking into these other avenues as to where the perpetrator or perpetrators of this crime could have entered and exited the crime scene. So going back to the alternative lane, why would this have been, in my opinion, a much better choice than the main road straight down into Workhouse Lane? Well, as I said earlier, it offers coverage both left and right, very high bushes either side, all the way down the duration of that lane. Now, when I've been there, I've probably walked that lane around 4 or 5 occasions over the past few years. There is evidence that that lane is in use, not only by the farmers, but by dog walkers. But you could equally say that regarding the rest of the lane in question. You could say that the start of the lane, where the Range Rover travels down, that part of the lane is also used by the public. So for me, that other part of the lane, the alternative lane which leads to the Wheatsheaf pub car park, isn't exactly more risky in terms of coming across maybe a dog walker or a member of the public whilst either entering or exiting that crime scene. What the alternative lane also offers is a place to wait and hide whilst awaiting the arrival of the Range Rover. You'll be able to see a little cut-in here, which was still there actually in 1995. This little cut-in at the end of the alternative lane allows you to stay hidden from the Range Rover on the left-hand side. Now, most people believe, at least the detectives believe, that someone was waiting on the right-hand side of the Range Rover. Yet I believe it's more than likely that they were waiting on the left-hand side, potentially the other side of the trees or bushes, where they could come out, walk around the back of the Range Rover and execute Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. And as I say, what's interesting is that little cut-in which leads to that smaller field there is still there to this day. Someone could have entered via the alternative lane, cut into that small little field. They would have been hidden by the trees and bushes where they could have awaited the arrival of the Range Rover. The problem we have, like a lot of things in this case, is that we don't have any crime scene photographs taken of that field, and we don't have any photographs taken, any crime scene photographs taken of the alternative lane. Now, some people are of the opinion that whoever killed Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, and bearing in mind this is a smaller section of the population, but some people believe that the perpetrator or the killer, the murderer, approached from the front of the vehicle, from beyond the locked 5-bar gate. Now, what tells me that this isn't really an avenue to follow up on, or isn't really likely a possibility, is the way that the bodies are found. And I think that's the key in all of this. When we take a look at how the bodies were discovered, there must have been an element of surprise, a huge element of surprise in these murders. So I think you'll agree that the likelihood of anyone openly approaching the Range Rover from the front of the vehicle from beyond the locked 5-bar gate is highly improbable. So that leaves us with the left of the Range Rover, the right of the Range Rover, and obviously the rear. Now, if someone had approached from the alternative lane, I guess the hardest or most difficult part of that, if they travelled from the alternative lane straight down towards the Range Rover, is the fact that it's quite a distance to travel. So what I believe is a possibility is, as I just said earlier, that someone was hiding towards the left-hand side of the Range Rover, probably the other side of the bushes and trees. Then they came out and executed Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. There's also the possibility that someone may have been hiding to the right of the Range Rover. Now, this is where an area of trampled ground was discovered by the detectives. But there's also talk that this area of disturbed undergrowth was caused by a reporter who gained access to the crime scene. Now, interestingly, just because they couldn't have approached directly from the front of the Range Rover from beyond the locked 5-bar gate, that doesn't mean they couldn't have accessed the crime scene from this direction. Now, this is a common misconception that really the only way down to the Range Rover is via Workhouse Lane. And that isn't actually the truth. If we take a look at a more aerial shot of this area, there are countless different roads, different lanes that you can use in order to access these fields, which all lead on to this alternative lane, which is part of Workhouse Lane and leads down to the Range Rover. So it is totally feasible that someone could have actually gone even further afield in order to get to the crime scene. They could have gone from somewhere like Rectory Lane, which is where Billy Jasper claimed he was dropped off, or he dropped someone off, I should say, on the evening of December the 6th. It's easily accessible from that lane or other lanes adjoining it. Now, if you are a believer that this was a crime which was committed by a professional, then you would imagine that going a little bit further afield, maybe travelling a mile across farmland, wouldn't actually be that much of a big deal, considering that it gives you the ultimate protection in terms of potential eyewitnesses, or maybe accidentally stumbling across a member of the public. That's not going to happen when you're travelling across fields like these. And as I said, what is interesting is that when you travel down that alternative lane, there's a very small type, not like a bridge, but it's basically two planks of wood which lead into this other field. That field then leads onto a multitude of other fields which join onto other roads and other lanes, as I've just said. So really what we're looking at here is access to the Range Rover from 360 degrees. Just because they may not have approached from the front of the vehicle does not mean that they didn't access the crime scene from that particular direction. Now, as most of you will know, the investigation early on was really just adamant that one of these murderers, one of these perpetrators, had travelled down in the Range Rover with the 3 deceased men, and there was more than likely someone already lying in wait to the right-hand side of the Range Rover as we look at it. But just talking about the different avenues, the different entry points and exit points to the Range Rover, it makes me wonder why these other avenues weren't explored particularly thoroughly. We have no crime scene photographs of the alternative lane. We have no crime scene photographs beyond the locked 5-bar gate. Yet both of these directions are, in my opinion, quite feasible for someone to enter and exit the crime scene. Now, back to the alternative lane yet again for one moment. What are the other benefits of using that particular part of the lane? If you go up to the end towards the Wheatsheaf pub car park, if you had a getaway vehicle almost lying in plain sight, would that not be better in terms of getting into a vehicle where other cars are surrounding it, driving off back onto the main road and away you go, rather than being the only vehicle, the sole vehicle which pulls out of Workhouse Lane back onto the A130 from the single farm track? Personally, my own personal opinion is that it would be almost better to be laying in plain sight, parked with other vehicles who may be, attendees of the pub or whatever you want to call them, but surrounded by other people, almost, as I say, laying or hiding in plain sight. Now, as we have no forensic clues, no forensic proof or any forensic evidence to suggest that anyone entered or exited the crime scene on foot via the lane in front of you, I still believe there is the possibility here that we're looking at a second vehicle being involved in these murders. Now, some people may say, well, if we haven't had an eyewitness account of the VW Passat, then why are we not having an eyewitness account of a second vehicle? Well, ultimately, we don't really know for sure exactly what time the Range Rover actually arrived at the lane. If it did arrive, as some people suggest, around midnight, then there's going to be a lot less traffic on the road and a lot less chance of being spotted by anyone in the surrounding area. My personal opinion is that the Range Rover is more than likely there from 7 p.m. onwards, but you can't discount the probability or the possibility that the vehicle was there sometime around midnight. Now, that also ties in with some eyewitness accounts or eyewitness statements suggesting that gunshots were heard around the sort of time period of midnight on December the 6th, 1995. We can't really discredit the time that this Range Rover arrived there because we don't have a time of death. I think to conclude this video, for me personally, I find it a little bit strange that we have such a concrete and sort of idealistic way in which this crime was committed, expressed by the lead investigator so early on in this investigation. Many of you will be aware that just 24 hours after discovering the bodies, it had already been surmised that the killer more than likely travelled down there in the Range Rover. There was someone waiting in the bushes. But the truth of Workhouse Lane and the truth of the crime scene itself is that there are a multitude of different entry and exit points, as I've described in this video to you. I will show you some photographs of the police investigation which is taking place beyond the locked 5-bar gate and towards the fishing ponds on White House Farm. Now, the investigation obviously took place as far away as these locations, but no crime scene photographs sadly exist beyond the locked 5-bar gate or any crime scene photographs from the alternative lane. And here we are again, back heading down towards the crime scene where the Range Rover containing Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe was discovered in December 1995. Now I've decided to start this walk this time at the lane which actually backs onto what was the Wheatsheaf pub car park. It's now an equestrian centre and you can just see that a little building that's just past that. That is part of where the Wheatsheaf would have been. There's a car park beyond that which would have been the Wheatsheaf pub car park, and here is the lane which actually backs onto what was that car park. Now this leads all the way down to the crime scene itself. It's a lane which I have covered in many videos previously, so I thought I'd start the walk today by actually travelling down the lane towards the crime scene itself. Now I've done a few trips to here previously. This one isn't going to be anything groundbreaking, but I just thought I'd do this video by actually coming in this direction instead of what I normally do, which is go from the crime scene back up this way. I thought I'd actually make it actually entering the crime scene from this direction, if that makes sense. Now, a lot of people, well I should say not a lot of people, but someone actually commented the other day about a video I made regarding the lack of any crime scene photographs of this lane, and in that comment the person said, well, maybe they didn't have any footprints. Just take a look. I mean, this is a lane that's used by, as you can see here, there's hoof prints there, the odd footprint. This is a lane that is used by dog walkers, people walking their dogs and riding horses. It's a lane that does have a fair amount of footfall. Now, why that's important is because, quite simply, the other lane, which actually heads out onto Main Road, there wasn't any footprints discovered. There were no tyre tracks from a getaway vehicle. Yet that lane is the sole focus of this investigation, from what I can gather. The actual even existence of this lane doesn't really show up at all in any of the documents whatsoever. But why is that important, you may ask? Why does it even matter that there's another lane which you can enter and exit the crime scene from? Well, why I feel it's important is because when you look at how the crime was investigated, as in they attended the crime scene, they looked for as much evidence supposedly as possible, and then within the first 48 hours they'd already decided that that someone possibly travelled down in a Range Rover with Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, and whoever committed this crime entered and exited the crime scene from the lane which goes directly back onto Main Road. Now, the problem with that is that we don't have any evidence of that. We don't have any concrete evidence that that lane was ever used at all. And what also leads this lane to being a possibility, especially if you believe Billy Jasper's version of events, is the fact that this lane and these fields beyond this hedge line here actually lead to the road in which Billy Jasper was supposedly parked. So if he did have someone with him who got out of the vehicle that evening, he would have come across, I'll just get down here because I can show you the exact field. He would have come across these fields and would have more than likely have crossed round about here. Now this is just one of many openings as we head down to the crime scene itself. And these fields, as I say, in the distance, they all join up to the road in which Billy Jasper claims he was parked. So I mean, if you do believe Billy Jasper's version of events, then really you are subscribing to the possibility that this lane was the one in which the perpetrator of this triple murder both entered and exited the crime scene from. And as we get further down here, there's also another cut through. I've actually been across all of these fields. A long time ago, there was sort of like a notion that the crime scene, or where the Range Rover was discovered, it wasn't found down this lane, it was further on. And I actually went across all these fields around to the other side of the fields of White House Farm to investigate that area, and it wasn't the place where the Range Rover was found. Basically, the reason why a lot of people don't believe that the Range Rover was found where it was found is because obviously the lane has changed so much since 1995. It's had a lot of work done to it. It's been widened, it's been tarmacked, and obviously here, look, just another route where whoever committed this crime could have entered and exited from. Now, the benefit of using this lane, if you are a gunman, is obviously the secludedness of it. You're hardly likely to come across anybody. I mean, I've been down this lane 5 times, I think, and I don't believe I've actually come across a single person in the 5 or 6 times that I've been up and down here. So, but there is evidence that this lane is used, so I find it odd that there was no crime scene photographs of this lane. I mean, here, bike tracks, the odd footprint. I mean, it's not a lane that's hidden, it's basically parallel with the other one, and we'll see that when we get to the end of it. But anyway, what else can I talk about? Well, the channel's just hit 10,000 subscribers, which is a bit of a shock. The last sort of 2 weeks, the channel's views and subscribers have just gone absolutely crazy. So a big thank you and a big hello to all of the new subscribers and those who have been with this channel from its very inception. Clearly my dog loves this lane a lot more than what I do. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll travel to the end of the lane, we'll take a look at the crime scene, as we always do, have a little look at the house looking down Rettendon Hall. Really forgot the name of it then. We'll look at Rettendon Hall briefly, and then we'll take a quick look at the lane exiting the crime scene itself as well. Now, the last time I actually came here, it was dark, so I'm hoping that the picture quality on this video will be obviously a lot better than what it was back then. And this, look at this. The things I bloody do, eh? Christ almighty. As I said, my dog's a lot more at home down here than I am, that's for sure. But we'll get to the lane, we'll take a quick look around, As I've always said, that if you're ever planning on visiting the crime scene itself, do be mindful that some of this is actually private property, and even the parts that are public property or public right of way. Do bear in mind that, you know, this is someone's farm, this is someone's livelihood, and just be respectful if you do visit the crime scene itself. But anyway, I've been down, as I said, I've been down this lane so many times, but the thing I find just odd about it is just the lack of mention of it. And what's even more strange is that the jury, by all accounts, didn't even visit the crime scene. So the jury would have been shown photographs, the crime scene photographs. Were they aware that a different lane running parallel with the one that went onto the main road even existed? Did they know of its even existence? Makes you wonder. I mean, really, unless you visit the crime scene yourself, you wouldn't have even have known that lane was there. I mean, I didn't know that lane was there until the first time I visited, and I just thought, what? This is a bit odd. This lane, where does this lane go to? Started walking down it, and lo and behold, I end up in the Wheatsheaf pub car park, which just so happens to be supposedly where Jack Womes was waiting. So what do you make of it? Very, very odd. I mean, everywhere, just everywhere, tracks, footprints, hoof prints. I just don't get it. I don't understand. Why was this lane not mentioned? How did they know for certain that they used the other lane when there's no footprints? There's no footprints, there's no clues, no evidence to suggest that they came through that lane at all. For all someone knows, or for all someone could assume, the perpetrator just simply entered from this way. Why wouldn't they? Imagine that, just a pitch black evening, snow on the ground, and then you've got cover both sides. It would make perfect sense, but apparently not. If you're investigating a triple murder, apparently it's not even worth looking into. I guess what I want to know more than anything is why was its existence never even acknowledged? Even if they just said there was another lane running parallel with the one back to main road, but we found no evidence. But there isn't, there's not even a mention of it. It's like it just doesn't exist. It's like it's not here, but it's been here for years and years and years. Right, so now we're getting towards the end of the track here. We're near the crime scene itself. And you'll see what I mean when we get to the end here, about just how, I guess, similar the other lane is in its, I guess, in its proximity, how close it is to this one, and why I find it just so bizarre that this one just doesn't exist. Over in the distance there, that's all White House Farms grounds. Oh, and you can just see through here, that is Rettendon Hall. So that house would have been looking down on the lane itself that evening, but yet no nearby neighbours, no one from White House Farm, and no one from Rettendon Hall heard any gunshots that evening. which people do find incredibly strange to this day. I've been to this place so many times, but when I'm in the area, I always think it's a good idea just to come back down and just check it out, give an updated video for you guys, because the lane just changed so much between, I think it was like 95 and the year 2000, that people were just left wondering, like, well, that can't be where this crime took place. But it actually is. It just looks a lot different. Oh God, I wonder who that is. That's the farmer. It's Jiggins. It's Jiggins. He's going to get me. Jiggins. Is it Jiggins or is it Theobald? I feel like a peeping Tom now. I wonder where he's going. I've never met anyone since I've been down here. I don't fancy conducting an on-the-fly interview, if you know what I mean. Right, he's gone away anyway. Right, now I've traversed the muddy area and we're now at the mouth or the entrance to the lane. Now, another interesting point to make is that this little cut in here was there in 95, so theoretically the gunman may have been laying in wait here, waiting for the Range Rover to turn into the lane, and then followed the lane down behind the Range Rover. That's a distinct possibility. Now that's the lane that was supposedly used by whoever committed this crime. Why is that lane so much more believable than that one? And it's literally there. Literally there. This way, this way, this way, this way, this way. Come on. Right, anyway. So now we just take a walk down to where the Range Rover itself was discovered. You can see across there. You have Rettendon Hall. And obviously that man who was spotted standing on that very hill, wearing the khaki green army type jumper and binoculars, looking down onto the lane below. Quite a strange sighting, but I mean, as you've just seen there with that car coming past, the farmers around here are active on their land, and it could well have been just literally a farmer or someone who was hunting that day, standing in the field using his binoculars, or it could have been someone scoping out the lane for what's to come the very next day. Anyway, here we are at the sign, or the site I should say, the murder itself, and where the Range Rover actually was parked. A lot of people ask me what it's like when you visit here, and when I first came here I kind of expected it to be like, I don't know, just some sort of feeling, some sort of eerie feeling. But when you stand here, because it's changed just so dramatically, you just don't really get that sense. You don't really get that feeling at all. I guess if you just stop and picture yourself being in the Range Rover, I guess it does add something to this location, but mostly it just looks unrecognisable in so many ways. What I do find interesting though is the fact that these trees were here. These trees that stand to this very day bear witness to those murders, and that's what I find interesting. The things that were here back in 1995, the large trees that existed, Rettendon Hall looking down on the crime scene, the places that existed when this horrific crime took place, where this tree was here, the trunk was still exactly where it is today, witnessing those events of December the 6th. Now that might sound crazy to some of you, but it's just something I find interesting, things that were there at that period in time. I'm not so much interested by the widening and the addition of tarmac to a farm track. I'm interested in the objects that were here on that very night. The tree that probably looks exactly the same as what it did back on that evening in December of 1995. The foliage, the tree stumps, the trees that are still alive, the trees that are dead. All of that I find fascinating. The fact that it was there when it happened. Anyway, let's just take a very brief walk up to the quote unquote official escape route regarding this crime. We'll take a brief look there, and then we will wrap up today's video. Now, what I think about when I'm here sometimes is the crime's been done, the crime's committed, they're dead, and then the sort of anxiety, the anxiousness, the tension, the panic, the fear that we've been going through whoever committed that crime's mind as he walks back up the lane to make his getaway. But I'll never ever get my head around the fact that that lane supposedly bears zero relevance. I will never be able to get my head around that. So anyway, this is probably one of the most interesting parts of the crime scene which exists today, because this part is largely unchanged, and that's what I like about it. That's what I find interesting about this particular area. The fact that we have a very narrow entranceway into the actual part where the Range Rover was found. It's just as narrow as it was back in 1995. There hasn't been any changes to it, and this is what it would have looked like, minus the snow obviously, as that evening in December 1995. Now you can see how close Rettendon Hall is there, and yet I believe the guy was called Rolfe, I think that's what his name was. He said that, I believe he said he was in that evening, but he didn't hear a single thing, not a cat's whisper. So anyway, take a walk further up the lane here, and that's another thing that I kind of think about when I'm here, is the turning of that corner in the Range Rover, the travelling down this lane, as my dog is so gracefully demonstrating, travelling down this lane in the Range Rover, the narrow track, the snow-covered ground on which it travelled. Those are the things that interest me, the picturing the event taking place. And then finally, the last part, or the last piece I want to show you today, is just a little turning where Darren Nichols supposedly was waiting with the getaway vehicle. Can you imagine whoever committed this crime just jogging, sprinting, whatever they were doing, back up this lane to get to the getaway vehicle, knowing that 3 men lay dead in the vehicle in a misted up Range Rover. The job was done and they were off, they were out of there. Just the exhilaration, I guess, and panic that would have been going through someone's mind after first entering that lane, knowing exactly what they were going to do, and then exiting back towards Main Road. Anyway, they're doing some work here. I don't know what, but obviously doing some sort of work here. I don't know what they're planning, but something's going on. Right, come here. Come here. Right, and you see this is the cut in here. It actually looks a lot smaller than what it does in some of the crime scene photos, but this is the cut in where Darren Nichols said he turns in here, he turns into this part and spins the car around. So the car is now facing this way, sort of facing outwards. Let's just give you a proper view. The car would have been facing this way, and then the interior light comes on and they head off supposedly back up main road. This way. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. I'm now going to make the arduous trek back to the wheat sheaf and take some more pictures quickly while I'm here. And I'll see you guys again. What the hell is he doing? In the very next video. Take care.